I've built a lot of things in my life. A company, a home, a family. You know what I never built? A tolerance for a man who drinks your bourbon, laughs in your living room, and has the nerve to call it inheritance. But we'll get to Harold. First, let me tell you about the Thursday afternoon I pulled into my own driveway and realized my in-laws had moved in. Welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Hit that like button. Drop a comment below, letting me know where you're watching from. This story is going to take you somewhere. Now, let's get into it. My name is Andrew Martin, 69 years old, born and raised in Fort Collins, Colorado, east side of town. I have one son, Daniel, 31 years old, sharp, good-hearted, the single best thing I ever contributed to this world. And I have a second home, a 4-bedroom Craftsman on Mariana Butte Drive in Loveland, Colorado, sitting on a gentle hill that looks out over the reservoir, like the whole landscape was arranged specifically for the view from my back porch. I bought that house 12 years ago. I had been planning to rent that house out. The Loveland market was strong. My property manager, Jane Holt, 20 years in Colorado real estate, no nonsense, exactly the kind of woman you want handling your property, had already fielded serious interest from 2 couples. Good candidates. Strong applications. All I needed to do was drive down, walk the property one final time, take some updated photos for the listing, and hand Jane the green light. 45 minutes from Fort Collins to Loveland on a clear August day. I've made that drive more times than I can count. Windows down, the kind of late summer Colorado air that sits warm and dry and honest in your lungs, the reservoir catching the afternoon sun in the distance like it was showing off. Radio on, something I wasn't really listening to. I was thinking about rental pricing, thinking about whether the primary bedroom needed a fresh coat of paint before the new tenants came in. I was in a genuinely good mood. I turned onto Mariana Butte Drive at 2:14 in the afternoon. The street looked exactly like it always did. Clean, quiet, the big cottonwoods throwing long shadows across the pavement. A couple of kids on bikes 3 houses down, doing what kids in August do when the day is still wide open and school is still somebody else's problem. Completely normal. And then I pulled into my driveway. 3 vehicles I didn't recognize. A Chevy Silverado with Kansas plates parked closest to the garage. A white GMC Yukon behind it. A silver Honda Accord with a cracked taillight squeezed along the side fence. My garage door standing wide open. And from somewhere inside the house, music. Not party loud. Just comfortable. The music of people who feel no need to keep it down because they feel no need to explain themselves. I sat in my truck. Didn't reach for the door handle. Just sat there with the engine ticking as it cooled, looking at those 3 vehicles, letting my brain do what it does when something doesn't add up. That slow, deliberate turn, like a combination lock finding its numbers one at a time. Then I recognized the Chevy Silverado. Harold Bennett's truck. My daughter-in-law's father. I'd seen it once before, parked in Daniel and Cassie's driveway 2 summers ago. I sat with that for a moment. Then I turned off the engine, put my keys in my jacket pocket, and walked through my own front door. 6 people. There were 6 people in my house. Occupied. I want you to picture this carefully, because I need you to feel what I felt standing in that doorway. My living room. Harold Bennett in my armchair by the window. My armchair. Leaned back, one ankle crossed over his knee, completely at home. His wife Maureen on the couch. Shoes off, feet tucked under her. The posture of a woman who has decided this place suits her just fine. Their son Kyle in the other chair, phone in hand, hadn't looked up once. Kyle's girlfriend Trish beside Maureen, laughing at something Harold had just said. And 2 people I had never seen in my life. A man in a University of Kansas hoodie and a woman who was barefoot on my refinished hardwood floors. At my kitchen island working through a charcuterie board that had absolutely definitively not been in this house this morning. Someone had gone shopping. For my house. Like it was a vacation rental they'd booked for the long weekend. And on my kitchen counter, open, already significantly reduced, my bottle of Blanton's single barrel bourbon. 2019. A bottle I had been specifically saving for an occasion that had not yet arrived. It had arrived now, just not for me. Harold saw me first. He didn't flinch, didn't straighten up, didn't have the basic human decency to look remotely caught. He saw me standing in my own doorway, and his face broke into the wide, easy grin of a man welcoming a guest into his home. Andrew, arms spread wide, bourbon in hand, we were wondering when you'd show up. I stood in the doorway and said nothing, not because I had nothing to say, because I was doing something more important. I was looking. At the open Blantons. At the barefoot woman on my floors. At Kyle, who still hadn't looked up from his phone. At Maureen, who gave me a small finger wave from the couch like I was a neighbor who'd popped by unexpectedly, and she was graciously receiving me. Then I looked back at Harold. "Harold," I said. My voice came out completely level. "Didn't plan it that way. It just came out that way, the way water finds level without being told to. What is going on here?" Not a question. A statement. The kind that requires an answer anyway. He waved his hand. The gesture of a man dismissing a mildly amusing concern. "Oh, don't worry about it," he said. "Don't worry about it. In my house. With my bourbon. Cassie said it was fine. We needed somewhere for the family to stay. Kids were coming through." He gestured around the room like he was presenting it to me. Great house, by the way. That view out back is something else. I let that sit for one breath. "Cassie said it was fine," I repeated. "It'll be hers anyway," Maureen offered pleasantly from the couch. Reasonably, like she was commenting on the weather. "Once Daniel and Harriet's, so really we're basically." Then he laughed. "I need you to stay here with me, because this is the moment." Not Maureen's comment. Not the open bourbon. Not the barefoot stranger on my floors. The laugh. Harold Bennett's full, genuine, completely unguarded laugh. The laugh of a man who has done the math, liked the answer, and sees absolutely no reason to hide it. The laugh of a man who believes in his bones that whatever Andrew Martin has built is already, in some permanent and settled way, available to the Bennetts. And that the funniest thing in the room right now is the idea that the man standing in the doorway might actually do something about it. Kyle snorted without looking up. Trish cackled on cue. The man in the Kansas hoodie raised my bourbon glass toward me like a toast. I let the laughter finish. Didn't interrupt it. Didn't rush it. Let it run its full length the way you let a man talk until he's said enough. Then I walked in. Not fast. Not with heat in my step. I walked the way I walk into every room I own, like I have all the time in the world and every right in it. All the way to the center of my living room. Stopped there. Looked around one more time. The bourbon, the bare feet, the charcuterie board, Kyle's phone, Harold's grin. Then I looked at Harold and I spoke quietly enough that everyone leaned forward slightly without realizing they were doing it. "I'm going to say this once," I said. "This is my house. My deed. My name." A pause. Short, clean, deliberate. "I don't know what Cassie told you. I don't know what you told yourselves on the drive here. But I need every person in this room and every vehicle in my driveway gone before I get back. Harold." Just his name. Flat and final as a period at the end of a sentence. He closed it. I looked around the room one last time. Let my eyes land on each face, slowly, without rush, the way you look at something you're committing to memory. Then I walked back to my front door, opened it, and paused with my hand on the frame. "Make sure you replace the bourbon," I said. I pulled the door shut behind me, because telling them to leave was the floor. What came next was the ceiling. And Harold Bennett had absolutely no idea how high it went. I got in my truck. I backed out of my driveway at a normal speed. I drove 4 blocks down Eisenhower Avenue and pulled into the Starbucks parking lot and sat for a minute with the engine running and the air conditioning on and the late August sun pressing white and flat against the windshield. Then I pulled out my phone and called my son. Daniel answered on the second ring. "Hey, Dad. Everything okay?" "No," I said. "But I need you to answer a question before I explain anything else." A pause. Concern creeping in. "Okay. Did you give Cassie a key to the Loveland house?" Silence. The kind that lasts too long. "Yeah," he finally said. "Months ago. She said she wanted to be able to check on the place. Water the plants if you were gone for a while." I didn't think anything of it. "Did you tell her she could give it to anyone else?" "Of course not." His voice tightened. "Dad, what happened?" I let out a long breath. "I pulled up to the house today, Daniel. Your in-laws were inside. Harold in my chair. Maureen on my couch. Kyle and his girlfriend. 2 strangers I've never seen. My bourbon open on the counter. They looked like they'd been there for days." Another silence. Longer this time. When Daniel spoke again, his voice was lower. Measured. The voice of a man doing math he didn't like the answer to. "Cassie didn't tell me. I know she didn't." "I'm sorry," Daniel said. Quietly. Honestly. The way a good man says it when he's done nothing wrong but still feels responsible because someone he loves did. "Don't be," I said. You didn't hand Harold the key. You trusted your wife. What are you going to do? I looked out the windshield at the Colorado afternoon. The sun was still high. The day was still warm. And I was already thinking 3 moves ahead. I'm going to handle it, I said. I hung up. And I called Bill Tanner. Bill has been my attorney for 19 years. He knows me well enough to skip past the part where most people say, "How are you?" and get directly to the part where something actually matters. I told him everything, every detail, in sequence while it was still fresh. There was a pause on the line when I finished. The particular Bill Tanner pause means he's running 2 or 3 things simultaneously in that careful attorney brain of his. Then he told me what we would do next. Here's what nobody tells you about playing the long game. It doesn't only feel like anger. It feels like clarity. That cold, clean, laser-focused kind that only arrives when someone has pushed you far enough past emotion that you come out the other side somewhere quieter, somewhere more deliberate, somewhere significantly more dangerous. That's where I was that afternoon I walked out of my own house in Loveland. I called Jane Holt from the Starbucks parking lot the same afternoon, still in my truck, coffee going cold in the cup holder, and told her to pump the brakes on showing the property for exactly 1 week. Didn't explain why. Jane has worked with me long enough to know that when I say hold, I mean hold and I mean I have a reason. She said understood, and that was the end of that conversation. Then I drove back to Fort Collins. The house was empty when I got back. I know because I drove past it on the way out of Loveland, all 3 vehicles gone. Garage door closed, the street quiet and ordinary in the late August evening. They'd left, because whatever Harold Bennett believed about that property, he wasn't willing to test it against a man who just looked him in the eye in the center of his own living room, and spoken in that particular quiet voice. Nobody ever is. 6 days later I had Sunday dinner with Daniel and Cassie. We sat down. Daniel told me about a work project he'd been leading, a restructure that was more complicated than it looked, the kind of problem that requires you to think 3 steps ahead. I told him it sounded like he was handling it exactly right, because he was. Cassie talked about her sister's new baby, how tired everyone was, how happy. I asked good questions. I listened well. I laughed when something was funny because it actually was. Somewhere between dinner and dessert, Cassie mentioned, lightly, carefully, the way you mention something you've decided to mention but haven't fully decided how, that her parents had stopped by the Loveland house. I looked up from my plate, open, mild, the expression of a man receiving mildly interesting news about a mildly interesting topic. "Oh yeah," I said. "How'd they like the area?" She watched my face for a half-second longer than the question required, checking, looking for the flicker, the tightening, the signal that this conversation had weight. I gave her nothing. "They loved it," she said. "Great reservoir," I said. "Beautiful this time of year." And I reached for the rolls and asked Daniel if he wanted the last one. He did. I gave it to him, and that was the end of that. What Cassie didn't know, what nobody at that table knew, is that 48 hours earlier, Bill Tanner had begun drafting the legal framework for my Loveland property. Not any structure that implied shared access, or future assumption, or the quiet, comfortable inheritance that Harold Bennett had apparently already mentally deposited into his family's account. Bill called me 4 days after that Sunday dinner. He had that tone, the one that means something has developed that requires more than one legal framework simultaneously. "Jane went by the property," he said. "I know," I said. "Routine walkthrough." She collected the mail. I set my coffee mug down. "It wasn't your mail," Bill said. "I already knew where this was going, but I let him finish. Magazine subscription. Piece of correspondence from a Kansas insurance company. Costco membership renewal." A pause. "All addressed to Harold and Maureen Bennett, at your address." The late August light was doing that thing it does in Colorado in the evenings, going long and amber and specific, like it's picking out details it wants you to notice before the day ends. "How long do you think?" Bill said. "Long enough," I said, "to get a Costco membership renewal." Silence on the line. The particular Bill Tanner silence that means he's building something in his head and wants to get it right before he speaks. "Andrew," he said finally, "this wasn't spontaneous. That afternoon, the party, the food, the comfort of it, the way they were sitting in that house, that was people who felt like they were borrowing something. That was people who felt like they already lived there." I said nothing. "That has implications," he said, "that go well beyond a bad afternoon." "Build the file," I said. "Already started," said Bill. "Here's what went into the file. A formal trespassing report filed with the Larimer County Sheriff's Office. Quiet. No press. No drama. No phone calls to Daniel or Cassie. Just a report. Dated, time-stamped. In the permanent record, a certified letter sent directly to Harold and Maureen Bennett at their home address in Wichita, Kansas, formally notifying them that the property at Mariana Butte Drive, Loveland, Colorado, was private property, that their presence there had been unauthorized, and that any future entry without written permission from the owner would be pursued as criminal trespass under Colorado law. I did not warn Harold the letter was coming. I did not tell Cassie. I did not mention it to Daniel. I sealed it the same way Bill sealed the envelope. Clean, complete, sent. The certified return receipt would come back when it came back. Meanwhile, I called Jane and told her we were moving forward. She had 2 strong applications. Her recommendation was a young couple, Ryan and Beth Hudson. Excellent references. Jane mentioned they'd sent her a handwritten thank you note after their second showing, which she brought up with the quiet appreciation of someone who doesn't see that anymore. I signed the lease at $2,850 a month. Move-in date, September 1st. I stayed on the back porch that evening until the mountains went dark. Made myself a promise, not out loud, but the real kind, the kind that lives in a man's chest and doesn't leave. Daniel would not be collateral damage in this. Whatever came next, he would walk away knowing his father had moved for him, not past him. That was the line I would not cross. 14 months passed. Quietly, the way the best moves always do. Ryan and Beth Hudson settled into the Loveland house. Beth planted something in the back garden. The lease payments came in on time every month, without exception. And underneath all of that quiet normality, something had been growing in my mind. Since the afternoon I'd stood in my own living room and watched Harold Bennett laugh. I called Bill Tanner at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. "I've been thinking," I said. "I assumed you would be," Bill said. "I want to sell the property," I said. "The Loveland house." A pause. The Bill Tanner pause. Running implications, checking angles. "Outright," he said. "Outright. Best offer. Clean sale." I set my mug down. "I want it gone." "Andrew, that's a significant asset." "The asset," I said, "isn't the house. The asset is what I do with the proceeds." I heard him set something down on his desk. The sound of a man giving a conversation, his complete attention. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said. So I told him. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. Then Bill said, in the careful, measured tone of a man who has practiced law for 30 years and has learned never to show surprise, "Andrew, that is the most thorough thing you have ever asked me to do." "Can you do it?" I said. "I can have the framework drafted by end of week." "Good," I said. "Get started." I hung up, poured a second cup of coffee, and started making other plans. Here is what Bill Tanner built over the following 2 weeks. I want you to pay attention to every piece of this, because every piece matters. First, the house. Jane Holt had it listed within 4 days. Good photos, honest description, strong asking price. By day 9, she had 3 serious offers. I took the cleanest one, a couple from Denver, closing in 30 days. I signed the paperwork on a Wednesday afternoon and felt nothing but certainty. The house was gone. Whatever assumption Harold Bennett had been quietly building his future on had just been sold to strangers for fair market value. No drama, no announcement. Just gone. But that was only the beginning. The proceeds went directly into a trust. Not a simple trust. A specifically, carefully, deliberately structured trust that Bill spent the better part of a week drafting with the kind of precision that makes other attorneys uncomfortable. Here is what that trust said in plain language. Daniel Martin would inherit. Fully. Completely. His father had not abandoned him and had never considered it for a single moment. But, and this is the part I need you to hear, the terms included one specific clause, written in clear, unambiguous legal language, stating that if Daniel's spouse wished to have any legal access to, claim on, or benefit from any asset held in the trust, she would be required to sign a postnuptial agreement first, drafted by independent counsel, signed voluntarily, on record. Not because I hated Cassie, because I had watched her parents stand in my living room and count money that wasn't theirs yet. And I had understood in that moment that love without structure is just an open door with a welcome mat for whoever feels entitled enough to walk through it. I was done leaving doors open, but I wasn't finished. Bill also established a separate legacy fund, specifically and exclusively designated for any future grandchildren, Andrew Martin's grandchildren, structured to pass directly to them, bypassing Daniel and Cassie entirely if circumstances ever required it. Their education, their start, their future, protected from decisions made above them by people they hadn't chosen and couldn't control. I thought about that fund for a long time after Bill explained it back to me, about children who didn't exist yet, about what it meant to build something designed to outlast you by 2 full generations. My wife Karen would have loved it. She always thought further ahead than me. Even at the end, she was thinking further ahead. I told no one, not Daniel, not Cassie, not my friend Dave, who called me twice that week and got warm, easy, completely normal Andrew Martin on the line both times. I was present at every dinner, consistent on every call, the same man I had always been. Because I was the same man. None of this had changed me. It had only confirmed what I already knew about what I'd built and what it deserved. 2 weeks after I signed the sale paperwork, I packed a bag, drove to Denver International, and boarded a flight to Santa Fe, New Mexico. I stayed 6 days at a small inn on Canyon Road. Ate well. Walked the plaza every morning when the air was still cool and the light was doing that thing it does in New Mexico, golden and unhurried, and completely unbothered by anything happening in Colorado. Read 2 books I'd been meaning to read for a year. Slept without an alarm every single morning. And I sent postcards. 1 to Daniel, 1 to Dave, and this one I'll admit I enjoyed most. To Daniel and Cassie's house. Addressed to the family, a photograph of the Santa Fe Plaza on the front. A simple note on the back, taking some time, back soon. Hope everyone is well. Dad. I want you to think about what that postcard did to Cassie when she held it in her hands. The Loveland house had just sold. The man who sold it had said nothing, explained nothing, argued nothing, and was now somewhere in New Mexico sending postcards. No anger, no confrontation, no indication of what was coming or when. Just a man on vacation, at complete peace. That postcard was its own kind of message, and Cassie Bennett Martin, who was considerably sharper than her father, understood it the moment she turned it over. She just didn't know yet how deep the message went. If you have been listening for a while, drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button while you're at it, and be sure you're subscribed. I came back from Santa Fe on a Sunday. Monday morning I called Daniel. Hey Dad, he said. How was the trip? Restorative, I said. Listen, I need to call a family meeting. My place, Saturday afternoon. Can you and Cassie make it? A pause. Is everything okay? Everything is fine, I said. Better than fine. I have some things I want everyone to hear together, directly, at the same time. A pause. Bill Tanner will be there. The silence on the line had a particular quality, the silence of a sharp young man, running variables quickly and coming up with a shape he can't quite name yet. We'll be there, he said. Saturday arrived the way important days always do, looking exactly like every other day until you're inside it. Clear Colorado morning. I was up at 6, coffee on, the house quiet in the way I've always loved. That particular Fort Collins morning quiet, like the whole city is still deciding whether to begin. Bill arrived at 1 o'clock, 30 minutes before anyone else. He came in, set his briefcase on the dining room table, accepted coffee, and looked over his documents with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has built something he's proud of. How do you want to play this, he said. Professionally, I said. Walk them through everything. No editorializing. No drama. Just the documents, exactly as written. And you? I'll sit at the end of the table, I said, and let the paperwork do the talking. Bill almost smiled. You've been planning that line. 3 weeks, I said. Daniel and Cassie arrived at 1:28. Daniel in a flannel. Cassie in a light sweater, hair pulled back. Both of them carrying the careful energy of people who have spent several days trying to read a situation they don't have enough information to fully understand. Cassie's eyes went immediately to Bill's briefcase on the table, then to Bill himself, then to me. I smiled, warm and genuine. Come in. Sit down. We took our places, Bill at one end with his documents, me at the other. Daniel and Cassie across from each other in the middle. Daniel with his hands folded on the table, Cassie with hers in her lap, very still. Thank you both for coming, I said. I asked Bill here because I've made decisions about my estate, and I want everyone to hear them clearly, directly, and at the same time. No confusion, no secondhand information, no surprises later. I looked at both of them evenly. Bill, go ahead. Bill opened the first document, And what happened over the next 40 minutes was not a confrontation. It was not a scene. There was no raised voice, no pointed finger, no moment where someone stood up dramatically and said something they'd been rehearsing. It was something quieter than all of that and significantly more permanent. It was a man reading legal documents at a dining room table in Fort Collins, Colorado. Bill started with the sale of the Loveland property. Confirmed, completed, closed. Proceeds received in full. He slid the closing statement to the center of the table. Daniel looked at it. Cassie looked at it. Neither of them spoke. Then the trust. Bill walked through it the way he walks through everything, methodically, without rush, in the precise language of a man who understands that clarity is the most powerful thing a legal document can offer. Daniel's inheritance was outlined completely, full, generous, not a dollar diminished. His father had not punished him. Across the table I watched Cassie's shoulders drop, barely perceptibly, just a fraction, as the weight she'd been carrying since the postcard arrived began to ease. Then Bill turned the page and read the clause, word for word. The requirement for a post-nuptial agreement, independent counsel, voluntary execution, properly recorded, as a condition of any spousal access to trust assets. The silence that followed was the most complete silence I have ever heard in my own home. I watched Cassie's face move through 3 distinct things in the space of about 4 seconds. First, shock. The genuine involuntary kind you cannot manufacture and cannot hide. The kind that arrives before the mind has time to arrange itself. Second, recognition. Something shifting behind her eyes. A slow arriving understanding that what her father had said in that Loveland living room had not simply been witnessed, had not simply been remembered, but had been translated into documents, into legal language, into something now sitting on a dining room table that she had not known existed until 30 seconds ago. And third, and this is the one that told me everything I needed to know about Cassie Martin, something that looked remarkably like relief. The raw, complicated, difficult relief of a person who has been carrying something they couldn't name and has just had it named for them out loud by someone else. She looked at me. I held her gaze. No anger, no satisfaction, no score being settled across a table. Just steady, clear, direct eye contact that said, I see you, I saw this, and I did what I had to do. She looked back down at the table. Daniel had read the clause twice. I could tell by the way his eyes tracked back to the beginning. When he looked up at me, his face had gone through its own quiet rearrangement, not toward anger, not toward defensiveness, but toward something I recognized because I'd felt it myself. Standing in a Fort Collins warehouse at 27 years old, and understanding for the first time that the game was serious and you had to play it like it was. Understanding, the clause wasn't punishment. It wasn't an accusation of Cassie. It was a wall built around his future, by a man who had watched someone count that future before it was theirs, and had decided without drama and without malice that it would never be that easy again. Daniel understood that his father had just protected him. Bill turned to the final document, the legacy fund. He explained it plainly, a separate structure fully funded from the Loveland proceeds, designated exclusively for any future grandchildren of Andrew Martin, their education, their opportunities, their beginning in this world. Structured to bypass Daniel and Cassie entirely if circumstances ever required it, going directly to the children, clean, untouchable, already waiting for people who didn't exist yet. Cassie made a sound, small, involuntary, not a word, just the sound that escapes when something reaches you somewhere you weren't guarding. She pressed her lips together and looked at the table, and Daniel reached across and put his hand over hers, right there, without hesitation. Without looking at me for permission or guidance, just reached across and covered his wife's hand with his and held it. I looked at my son in that moment and felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for weeks. Whatever was going to happen between Daniel and Cassie, whatever conversations were waiting for them in the car ride home, in the days and weeks ahead, my son was going to be all right. He was strong enough to protect his marriage and understand his father at the same time. He didn't have to choose. I had made sure of that. That was the whole point. Bill gathered his documents with quiet efficiency, closed his briefcase with a soft final click, looked at me, I nodded. Then I pushed my chair back from the table, stood up, and buttoned the middle button of my jacket. Unhurried, the way you button a jacket when something is finished and you're ready for what comes next. I looked around that table, at Bill, who had built this with me and executed it flawlessly, at my son, who had his mother's eyes and my stubbornness and more quiet strength in him than he'd ever had reason to fully use. At Cassie, who was looking at me with an expression I didn't have a single clean word for, complicated and raw, and more honest than anything I'd seen from her since this entire thing began. I spoke slowly, not because I was choosing words carefully, because true things deserve to be heard at the pace they were meant to travel. I built everything in this family, I said. Every asset, every structure, every dollar, and every document Bill just walked you through. I built it with my hands and my time and years of my life that I gave willingly because that's what you do for the people you love. I paused, and I protected it the same way, because that's also what you do. Not to punish, not to control, but because building something and not protecting it isn't love. It's just carelessness wearing a nice face. Then I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. Now, who wants lunch? Bill stayed for lunch. Daniel squeezed my shoulder on the way out, that same solid grip at the door, the one that says everything without saying anything. Cassie paused on the threshold, turned back, looked at me for just a moment with that same complicated, honest expression. Then she nodded, small, real, and walked out. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. Dave, my friend, called at 4. How'd it go? He said. Fine. I said. Fine. That's all I get? It went exactly as it was supposed to, I said. Bill was excellent. The documents were airtight. Daniel understood everything. And Cassie. I walked to the kitchen window, looked out at the Colorado afternoon, the mountains in the distance, permanent and unchanged, completely indifferent to the Bennett family's assumptions about what belonged to them. Cassie nodded on the way out, I said. The real kind. Dave was quiet for a moment. And Harold? When he hears, Harold will hear everything through Cassie, I said. The sale, the trust, the clause, the legacy fund. He'll sit in his kitchen in Wichita and understand what it all means. I paused. And then he'll think about a man who sold a house, restructured an entire estate, flew to New Mexico, sent postcards, and came home and called a family meeting. All of it without raising his voice once, without making a single threat, without ever once losing his composure. And what will he conclude? Dave said. I set my coffee mug down. That the day he walked into my living room and laughed, I said, was the most expensive decision he ever made. The legacy fund is fully established. It's waiting patiently, the way well-built things always do. The post-nuptial agreement was signed 7 weeks after the family meeting. Independent counsel. Voluntary. On record, Cassie signed it herself. Harold Bennett has not set foot in Fort Collins since. And somewhere in Wichita, Kansas, a man who once spread his arms wide in someone else's living room and laughed, sits quietly with his morning coffee and thinks about a family meeting he was never invited to, about documents he'll never see, about a legacy fund built for grandchildren whose future he cannot touch. He knows what happened. He just has to live with it, every single day. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from. I will see you on the next one.